Well, hey there. Boy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls all around the world. It's once again time for the 1021 podcast, the internet's favorite movie based list making podcast. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined with me as always by. Wait, don't start the
Don't
show,
tell me.
Jen.
Uh, yes, it's me. I'm so sorry for the slight delay in our podcast taping. Blame my uh I don't know, mercurial stomach for being so unpredictable. But here I am, and Josh, I got to say, I
Mhm.
didn't have a lot of faith in this week's list. I thought it was going to be maybe not difficult, but I thought it was going to be like way too pigeonholed. Like I thought it was going to be stuffy and, not. But then this was a crazy exercise in realizing not just how many books that I have read that have corresponding movies that go along with them, but suddenly I remembered how many movies I've seen that made me want to go read the books. And yeah, that list was pretty long. So this was a cool list. I feel like we are gonna do some cool stuff here. And some of my movies are, you know, some of them are real recent and some of them are much older. So I think we've got a nice mix of stuff going on here. At least I hope so.
I think if you know me, you know exactly what's on my list. So,
Uh oh.
but you know what? Before we get into all of that, I want to say, first of all, yeah, yeah, it was kind of, I was a little lost last night, to be honest, because Wednesday night, it's 10 to 1. That's what we do, right? So, having a Wednesday night free, I guess you could say, I I finally decided to take up my very, very dear friend Charlie's invitation to go see him host the Songwriter Spotlight at a place called Rain Dogs here in Jacksonville. Well,
Nice.
first of all, if you are local to Jacksonville or Orange Park or St. Augustine or Florida or the East Coast, get down there. It was an amazing experience, and just the simple act of sitting, there watching these wonderful artists perform their original music. Now, that you got to be clear, it is all 100% original music by the artist performing, and there were a few times where I was laughing hysterically. There were a few times where I was honestly on the verge of, you know, shedding a couple of, wet things from my eyeballs because
I'm glad you mentioned it was from your eyeballs because, yeah.
no, because you don't expect, when you're walking into a place and seeing people perform that you're not familiar with, to like be sort of sucker punched in the feels, and that's just how good uh, the talent is that shows up on Wednesday night. So if I'm highly recommend anybody that's out this way, middle of the week, go there. Maybe I'll see you there if we get a Wednesday night off again, and I do think I will partake more so in my friends' invitations. So yeah, that's what I was up to. While unfortunately Jen wasn't feeling well, I was out there living my best life.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you got the night off. I'm glad my stomach could facilitate that for you. That's really awesome.
Yes, it was very. Oh, now I feel bad, but
Why?
because you're feeling bad and I was having the time of my life.
Oh, oh, no, me feeling bad is just like the natural state of things, so do not feel bad at my expense. Um, y- it's when I feel great that people should be worried. So yeah, no, no shame. Glad you had a good time. Very glad you had a good time.
Yeah, in fact, if you do find yourself out this way, and not you specifically, Jen, because it'd be weird if you were like, "Hey, the 1021 podcast sent me," because you could just say, "I'm the 1021 podcast." No, yeah, if you're out there, tell them we sent you, and you'll get a free show.
If I'm just passing through Florida for any god-forsaken reason, uh it's probably safe to ask me is my mental health okay? Because I mean I'm from Hawaii, so pretty much everything that you have in Florida we have in Hawaii, except maybe Disney. But yeah, and gators. But we have sharks, so I mean it all evens itself out. I guess that's what I'm saying. The tropics, the
I'm
tropics.
getting a sign from the producer that says uh, that I should specifically say going to Rain Dogs to see the show is it doesn't cost anything anyway. So no, you will not get anything free. Just
Oh,
for
I
mentioning us.
see.
Um, so no, you won't. But make sure that if you partake in, having an adult beverage or two, you tip your bartender well. Period. Always tip your bartender well. But we have lists, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, we have lists. Um, Now, and I wish I had a smoother way to transition to this, but honestly, I don't. So, what I will say is this: every once in a while, there is an author that comes along and writes a book, much like they write a great song. Ah, there we go. That worked. And every once in a while, there's a producer out there that catches wind of this book, and they're like, you know what? That could make me money. I mean, that could make a good movie. And then they try to buy the rights to the book. Sometimes it's a clear, smooth sign on the dotted line. Sometimes it's fraught with peril. We don't have any of those behind the scenes stories for you today. At least I don't. But no, they exist. But every once in a while, a producer slash screenwriter slash director slash actor, not all one person, mind you, but all of these multiple jobs, multiple people, they'll find a book, a literary thing uh, to adaptate. I'm coining a new phrase here. Um, and they will create not only a piece of art that is on par with the original literary material, but sometimes it even kind of surpasses it. We're not going to talk about the stuff that we think falls below the standard tonight. We're going to talk about the stuff that holds its own against what it was based on, and that's why tonight's list is our top 10 literary adaptations.
So my everybody on my list except for my number 10, which I put on as sort of a shout out to what I think was maybe one of the best uh adaptations for Clive Barker, because so much of his work ends up being so misconstrued and like they just don't seem to get the point of it. But everything else on my list is basically like it's a literary piece that you know about, or the movie and it's well documented that it comes from a book. And so really it's just my number 10 that, maybe slightly on the outside. Well, actually my number 6 too, because I don't know how many people know about this particular movie or the book that it came from. despite the fact that it was really, really big at the time that it came out, and it kind of highlighted some things that were happening at the time. But do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
Ladies first, please.
All right. So I was trying to think of something funny to say for that, but I can't because I just don't have anything funny left in me today. Um, okay, my number 10 is the aforementioned slightly offbeat book called The Book of Blood. It is by Clive Barker. It was it was basically crafted into a movie in 2009. Now, what made me choose this is one, Clive Barker's books, including Hellraiser and many others, they're sensational. I mean, we're talking about horror that is not Stephen King horror, okay? Because Stephen King horror is like a little bit less. I shouldn't say less horrific, but it's not really as dark. Stephen King has a little bit more personality to his horror. Um, there's a lot more characters that, kind of feel as if they're at the focal point of a horror story, but their genuine perspective is g- good. They have we don't really start out with, like, some really dangerous stuff happening, and the darkness of Clive Barker's horror is oftentimes rooted in very, very scary origins. And Book of Blood is no stranger to this particular type of horror. And sort of, I guess, I'll say a little bit about what it's kind of about, but then I'm going to leave a lot that's open ended. It's basically about a paranormal investigation, and they bring on board this person who, sort of, as we find out, is maybe there under false pretenses. And what happens is he's really kind of an intersection, a gateway, a catalyst to what is happening in the house. And the more time that goes by, the more writing on his skin that appears. And the writing is very tied in with what is happening in the house. The investigation of the house kind of takes on a brand new understanding based on what ends up being on his skin. It's quite terrifying from the perspective of all of the characters involved. The two central characters are a character named Mary and a character named Simon. Mary is the one who's leading the paranormal investigation, and Simon is basically the quintessential gateway figure. And they start this, like, odd relationship, and that relationship continues to sort of develop. Now, in the movie, a couple of things sort of veer from the book, but the book itself is pretty close to what they bring forward in the movie. They have a relationship. There's a lot of things that are a little bit maybe less pronounced in the movie than they are in the book, but in the book there are some truly horrifying sequences. And of course, you get inner monologue in a book, so the things that are happening to Simon become absolutely brutal. And he has visions of things. There are things that he says that are happening that nobody else can see. And it's because he is, like, basically, in this threshold between two worlds. It is really, really an amazing both horror book and a adaptation. Now, I read Book of Blood before it was put into a movie. I've been a Clive Barker fan for most of my life. Um, this particular um, this particular story is, or the particular movie is, it's a Brit production, so it's a little bit, I think, kind of tame. um I don't know that for sure, like, I can't say that with authority, but I do think that there are things that are in the book which are far more frightening than what I saw in the movie, but it gets it right in terms of the tone, in terms of the hellscape that I feel like gets created around this. And now the reason, I just have to say this, the reason that I chose Book of Blood and not Hellraiser is because the the creator of Hellraiser, well, the adaptation for Hellraiser changed so much about the book that even though it is fabulous and I will watch it, every single weekend if I could, it doesn't quite do justice to the book. The movie is great by itself, but it's kind of like its own standalone work. Like it has sort of its own universe happening, which is a little bit divergent from what I understand from the book. But Book of Blood is kind of like whole cloth right out of the book. So that's why I chose that one instead of Clive Barker. I mean, instead of Hellraiser. Same Clive Barker, but different book. Um, okay, I'm going to say one more thing about this and then I'll move on. Um, the one thing that I really loved about this is that in the end, you realize that Simon is absolutely his the whole journey of this character is to become something other than basically what he is, and human skin is the only way to transmit these stories that are being told. um and by the end of the story, the transformation is so complete that it really leaves you haunted. I really liked this movie a lot, and I think if you watch the movie and then read the book or vice versa, you'll appreciate both of them for being as close to each other as possible. So, Book of Blood, Clive Barker, 2009.
That's your number 9.
Indeed it is. And
That's your
also
number
this
10.
No, I'm sorry, it was my number 10. It was directed and the screenplay was written by the same person, John Harrison. So,
Then I guess it's time for me to get up on.
yep, let's see what you got. I'm not hearing you if you are talking.
But my number 10,
There we go.
is it is supposedly one of the greatest stories ever told. And no, not that one. It is a story that everybody learns. I mean, not to get off on a tangent here, but when it comes to certain things that especially in my state, people are saying you should and shouldn't learn in school. I am under the camp, I guess, that this maybe should not be a story that not only is everybody supposed to learn about in school, but they're required to learn about in school. And quite frankly, I really think it's stupid. But when you get down to it, this adaptation was probably, nay, definitely my favorite version. I'm talking about Romeo and Juliet from director Baz Luhrmann, 1996. Had to double check. Yes,
Wait, was that an adaptation? I mean, was there actually a book that was based off of? I
plays are
never would have
published.
known that.
Published
Never would have known it.
literary things. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't pick up on that early enough. But long, I'm.
It's a lie, I tell you. Shakespeare was not really a person.
Hey, that's a thing that's actually being said. But
I'm
when it
sorry,
comes to
Josh.
this
Please
particular
proceed.
story, I will double down on the idea that this story shouldn't be taught in schools, not because of any kind of graphic content. I mean, after all, the original one with the one, the the one.
The other Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
I mean, okay, let's take a quick beat here. Romeo and Juliet, actually a lot of Shakespeare, but Romeo and Juliet in specific has probably been done more times and with more tropes than the King Arthur Excalibur story.
Yeah,
So
more than likely.
it is definitely extremely pervasive, and we've had tons of stories based on that. I mean, lots and lots of movies. But as a straight adaptation, which one? What year are you talking about for the movie?
Well, for my list, I'm talking about the 1996 version, but there was another version that recently came under fire for some explicit scenes involving a an actress that was not, we'll say, of age.
Oh, you're talking about the 1968 version
That's the
with
one they showed us in schools.
Olivia Hussey. Yes.
Now, the thing is, it doesn't matter really which version you watch, although I can't imagine there being a more fun version of Baz Luhrmann's. Like, to get back to my doubling down on the schools thing, you know, there are a lot of people out there with issues. They take umbrage with what the kids are being taught in school. Romeo and Juliet's considered, an all-time classic. I'm not a fan of, putting out there the love at first sight, oh, let's kill ourselves kind of thing, especially for, young people to sort of idolize. After all, when you're young, sorry, young people, you're stupid. Um, and that's just a thing of life. And that's why, we have young people, yes, even today, like, I want my Romeo. I want this. And it's a more healthier relationship than some of the other couples that, they romanticize. Like, I want a Joker to my Harley Quinn, or things like that. It's like, uh, yeah, okay. At least, with Romeo and Juliet, they're young and they're dumb, and they do something really stupid at the end. But that's an entirely. I went way off point here. The reason that I chose this story, even though I just like basically bashed the story itself as really bad story. I mean, it's told well, but I mean, come on, let's come on. Baz Luhrmann brings something new to the table, something that you don't really get to see very often with the works of Shakespeare, at least not in the way that he did it, right? Keeping all of the language, keeping one foot firmly planted into the Shakespeare prose, while also bringing, at the time, the world into a modern day. No more sword fights. Well, sword fights, after all, the guns were called swords and had sword kind of etched in them. That's it's fair play. Um, Singing this uh, modern adaptation, if you will, without altering the speech was it was a trip, to be sure. And quite frankly, uh, I absolutely adored the direction of this movie, and it made me a Baz Luhrmann fan. I can't say Elvis has kept me a Baz Luhrmann fan, but this is where it kind of began for me with my interest in his work. Plus, you got really good performances from young Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. I don't know. And I think one of the major standouts of this film is John Leguizamo. That's right, John Leguizamo doing Shakespeare, and it really rocks. So from the costuming to the set design to the cars, it's all just so 90s, but also such a throwback to the original plays that it's this interesting mixture of really two really disparate worlds that combined almost seamlessly. Um, I'm not really sure uh, where the points are that really kind of stick to me, other than the fact that it is Romeo and Juliet, one of my least favorite stories. Um, I'm not against star-crossed lovers. I think West Side Story is great, but for some reason, Romeo and Juliet, uh, the the base story just doesn't really quite do it for me. But this movie did. This movie made me enjoy it being told, and that's why it's my number 10.
Okay. I personally, I mean, just this is just my own 2 cents, and you can take it for whatever you want. I also am not a huge fan. Romeo and Juliet is probably my least favorite Shakespeare. Um, and Shakespeare did not always write very good, so that should tell you something. Although I do love the idea of the Capulet and the Montagues. I hate everything else about this. I hate Romeo and Juliet. It's just not my favorite. Okay. Uh, and also, if I really wanted to watch Romeo and Juliet, I would watch West Side Story. So there you go.
Or
Okay.
Nomeo and Juliet.
Oh yeah, good lord. I mean, there's just so many. Honestly, I was just sitting here thinking of how many Romeo and Juliet stories there are, and it's just insane. Titanic is Romeo and Juliet. All right. Well, without going too far overboard here, see what I did there. Let's go with my number 9. Also a crazy and perhaps deranged love story of all kinds where people behave super badly. Uh, I did not realize when I saw this movie at the time that I saw it that there was a book adaptation. And oh my God, I am so glad that I read the book because the movie was crazy, but the book was maybe just a little bit crazier, but it felt like I was coming home to the characters. I do feel like they did a really good job with this movie from an adaptation standpoint. So my number 9 is 1988's Dangerous Liaisons. Now, if you don't know what Dangerous Liaisons is, it is basically a bet that some very aristocratic people, high muckety mucks, as my grandmother would say, uh, make with each other about corrupting each other. There are all kinds of subplots going on in here, and everything revolves around what else but sex. Now, Dangerous Liaisons takes place in a kind of world where, let's just say, manners and good breeding are a thing. And not everybody is behaving as true to form as perhaps they really should. I will say that although I love the Dangerous Liaisons book, I almost think the movie was a little bit better. I enjoyed all the inner monologue that the book provided because it did sort of fill in some gaps and it made some things that didn't exactly make sense. By the way, if you want to see baby Keanu Reeves, he is in this movie. And oh my god, he's such a baby. It's crazy. But there are parts of the the story of the book that sort of drag a little bit, and the movie kind of excises them and really pulls things along pretty quickly. Um, Now, I have to say that this particular, well, because it's not like this was uh it's not like this, like Dangerous Liaisons, if you and this is where it gets really sticky, right? So there was a play in 1985 that was adapted from a French novel, and it's the French novel that, if you can get it translated, that you want to read, because that, I think, is where all the good stuff is. Um, it's not really in the play that preceded it, although the screenplay was sort of loosely based a little bit, I think, more on the actual play. So there's a little bit more kind of happening, and I think that's why they were able to streamline the script the way that they were. Um, okay, now let's sort of dissect why this is so good. So we're in uh Paris, in pre-revolution Paris, right? So we're sort of at a time in history when there is sort of like the highest decadence, and people really, the people who had a lot of money, they really had a lot of money, and they were spending it on things that into it, like the way that we lovingly sort of say, if we can say it lovingly, eat the rich. They would have been the rich, right? These people were landed gentry, sort of. I mean, like, it's a little bit different because it's France, so it's hard to use our standard terms, but they definitely had a lot of aristocratic uh compunction about them. And they got up to all kinds of terrible things. Mostly, I think, because none of them actually had to work. They had nothing but free time. They did, art things, and they did, some volunteer things, and but most of the time they were either entertaining or visiting, or they were in some way, shape, or form finding diversions for themselves, playing weird games. And that, of course, translates into coming up with all of these bets. Now, it's obviously a pretty grown up, if you will, idea. It's not for, anybody that's prudish, because there are a lot of things that are happening here which will feel morally degrading, which sounds crazy to say, but I mean, even for the time, it is definitely pretty big in terms of its controversial nature. um I It's also really the story of how this character named Valmont begins to understand that what he once thought was the most important thing, which was winning the bet, being sort of the alpha of every situation, he has to succumb to the understanding that he falls in love with the person that he has been sort of instructed to make fall in love with him, and then things sort of fall apart. But it's kind of the story of him and how his fall from grace, I guess, that maybe that's a good way to say it. And again, story wise, this movie gets it. It gets right to the heart of why it is so reprehensible to play with people, to make people your games, because everybody gets hurt, because people die, because things happen that cannot unhappen. And those things in particular really make up the central meat of this story. Movie wise, again, John Malkovich, fabulous. Glenn Close, unbelievably great. Michelle Pfeiffer, just beautiful. And Uma Thurman, also absolutely amazing. And then, of course, there is baby Keanu Reeves. Absolutely just love seeing him being I mean, he always looks young, but this is particularly a treat. Um, really big star-studded cast, and everybody is completely believable in these roles. I just absolutely love this movie. So, number 9, I'm so sorry that that was so long. Dangerous Liaisons, 1988.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could go on and on and on about this, but I have a number 8 that I want to get to, so
Okay, that's
regale
fair.
us with your number 9.
My number nine. My number nine. I have a feeling you might have a thing or two to say about.
I have a thing or two to say about everything, so, take it with a grain of salt.
This one in particular, though, in fact, I almost didn't add it to my list.
Ooh. I hope you didn't not add it to your list because of something I would say, because that actually is not. Please don't do that.
Oh, not because of something you would say. It's well, you'll see in a second. My, no. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and hit save on these lists because as we're doing our list, I'm updating our 1021 profile, 1021 Pod on Letterboxd. So if you want to see all the lists in their, amazing glory, just head on over to 1021, follow the 1021 Pod, and look at our lists because that's where they are. So my number nine. I think all I have to do is say 2001, and you might know what I'm talking about. Or you might need a little more to go off of.
Little.
Quite frankly, I thought that would have been enough, to be honest. No, my number nine is 2001's The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring from Peter Jackson. I understand you enjoy this film a little bit.
I do really love this film, but, well, you tell us why you think it is the best fit here for an adaptation, and I will tell you 800 reasons why you're wrong.
Here's the thing, I can't be wrong. And that's the beautiful part.
I see.
Because while I have read I've read The Hobbit and I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. By the way, I don't know if it bears saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. These are all movies based on books we've read. So if you're wondering why a certain something isn't on my list, or if a certain something isn't on Jen's list, and you go, but that was the greatest thing ever based on a book of all time, it's like, it might be because we haven't actually read it. Well, specifically, it might be because I haven't actually read it, because Jen,
or because we read it
read
but
every
then didn't
book.
like the movie. Because because there were plenty of books that could have been phenomenal, and I hated the adaptation. So.
Sphere. Anyway, the
We love to hate that movie.
the thing that I really enjoyed about Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, it's a mouthful to say every time. It one, Peter Jackson does, I think, an incredible job of bringing the imagery to life, to make it feel like it is an absolute fantasy world. Although I suppose I have to give a lot of credit to New Zealand for being New Zealand in that regard. It is a magical place. The casting, I've only read the book once. Got to be honest. It didn't break my brain to see who was cast in these roles. Although, admittedly, surprising to see the likes of Elijah Wood and like Sean Astin, do a lot of the to do what they did when it comes to The Lord of the Rings, if somebody had tried to get me to do my own fantasy casting in 2000, no, those guys probably would have never even crossed my mind. But it's one of those situations where I didn't doubt their ability to do it. I just kind of, oh well, that's a thing, I guess. Unlike, say, the Joker in The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger, where that was like a what? The guy from 10 Things I Hate About You, where Michael Keaton is Batman. I was like, what? Mr. Mom is going to be Batman? So when you see Elijah as Frodo, it's not like, what? The kid from The Good Son is going to be Frodo? Well, I guess I can sort of see that. I mean, it's not really out of the question, but the cast, as I was saying, the cast of this: Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Astin, Christopher Lee, Liv Tyler. It just goes on and on and on about all of these amazing actors and actresses that not only showed up, but they showed out when it comes to performances. That it's very easy to take something like this and sort of move into, for lack of a better term, a Schumacherism, where it suddenly just becomes a cartoon. It's very, a lot of special effects, a lot of things like that, and it's easy to kind of get not complacent, but to get lost while you're trying to perform, because a lot of the times you're not actually seeing the things that you're performing for. So performances in particular, might get a bit over the top. But whether it's just the talent of the people involved, or the talent of the director, Peter Jackson, something kept everybody grounded to make sure that the characters were interacting well with each other, and also stayed true to living in the world that they're inhabiting, which is always a joy to see on screen. And it can be a bit irritating if you notice when someone's performance just kind of leaves the set. The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, I chose. I could have gone with any of the movies. They're all pretty darn good in my opinion. But I chose the initial run of this trilogy because it did have the hardest job, I think, of capturing hearts and minds with the world, mainstream audiences in particular. After all, Lord of the Rings wasn't exactly something you were popular for, in high school back in the 90s and 80s and etc. So to get the fans on board, you had to be accurate, but to get everybody else on board, you had to be good, I guess. You had to do something to get people into invest in this thing that maybe they've heard of it, but they've never even considered picking up a book for. And Peter Jackson was able to pull that off and create almost an entirely whole new group of generations that enjoy Tolkien's work. And unfortunately, then those generations went on the internet to cry about everything else associated with it. But Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring is my number 9. Um, there you go.
So I mean, you know, it's grown on a lot of people, but in when these movies were coming out, I also ran a couple of different websites, and let me tell you, the number of people who hated these movies when they first came out was enormous. And the reason that they didn't like them had a lot to do with the fact that they left so much out, that the adaptation was very incomplete. And not only was it incomplete, but it mixed up key characters and mixed up places and events and really didn't do a lot of other things justice, which it would have only taken one sentence of dialogue to do. And now I am not here to critique Peter Jackson's vision of the Lord of the Rings because I love it. It's become beloved by many. And in terms of what the movie verse has done for the entire fandom of the Lord of the Rings, there is absolutely zero question that it has grown the fan base by epic proportions. However, there are many sins of omission that are difficult, if not impossible, to forgive. And although I recognize that Peter Jackson and Philippa and Fran had their own vision, it is difficult as a Tolkien fan, as it's more than being a fan, as being a reader of Tolkien who really loves the literature, to forgive some of the things that were removed or completely destroyed by the adaptation. So again, I love the movies for what they are, but to me they have a standalone premise to them that is absolutely not the books, and I just have a hard time understanding why they did some things over other things when I feel like the some things that they did added nothing to the movie. So yeah, and that's a whole huge topic for an entire podcast at some point. But I will move on to my number 8 and say,
Before you do,
yes.
but was I wrong about anything?
Um, I well, I mean, if we're talking about adaptations to movies, I mean, kind of, because like I had a really difficult, as much as I love uh The Return of the King, I have a really difficult time with some of the ways that they jumbled up events and made things feel as if they were happening at times when they weren't happening. I don't know, there's a lot of things that are really confusing there. And I guess from a movie standpoint, it's a great movie, but does it actually work as an adaptation? I don't know. I have issues. I have a lot of issues. It's and again, I don't want to get too far into it because I am literally a complete nerd about Tolkien and all of Tolkien's work, and I don't want to, like, I don't want to say that it wasn't a good choice, because I think it is a good choice. If you liked it, you liked it. But I personally just have such a huge problem with it because the adaptation was just not what I wanted it to be. And that's just personal. That is absolutely opinion related,
And
right?
that's all, well and fine, but I didn't say anything about how well it was adapted. I did uh,
Oh, I
talk
thought
about
that's what
his
we were doing.
ability. Well, I after having only read the book once, I didn't feel very qualified, especially with an actual expert in the house talking about how well it was adapted. Um, but I'd like to think that I put over pretty well the daunting task of making it a mainstream um, thing, bringing it to the masses rather than just the people that love the actual stories.
I mean, absolutely. Yes, and again, the Peter Jackson universe probably brought more people to read Tolkien than I think we ever could have imagined it even possible. So for that, that's fabulous. I feel like that's great. And I actually feel that way about a couple of the other books that I have on my list too. I don't know how many people have read them, but if you see the movie and like the movie, you should definitely read the book because there is something special there. So yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, my number 8 is a movie that, when it came out, was just a blockbuster. And amazingly, the movie that came before it, which also comes sequentially in the story, really did pretty badly. And nobody understood it. And I think people just didn't like it. And I think this is also kind of the way that it was in the book series too, because the Silence of the Lambs got incredible rave reviews from a book standpoint, and Red Dragon did get some acclaim, but really it was not picked up in the zeitgeist the way that Thomas Harrison's Silence of the Lambs did. Now, the reason that I chose Silence of the Lambs and not anything else is because Silence of the Lambs actually does a pretty faithful adaptation. It's not 100%, but it's pretty faithful to the struggle that exists. Like, there's stuff between Jack Crawford and Hannibal even. But specifically, I think there's stuff that happens with uh well, let's just say this. A lot of the characters seem to have webs in the Silence of the Lambs that aren't fully explored in the movie. And in this case, I'm actually going to let it go because it always creeped me out that Jack Crawford and Clarice Starling, well, that Jack Crawford seemed to have this thing for Clarice Starling. It kind of icked me out. And maybe that was intentional, maybe that was supposed to be that way in the book, but I'm kind of glad that they sort of underplayed it in the movie because I don't think it was actually important. And it didn't feel like it was even super important to the story, maybe a little bit, but anyway. Um Anthony Hopkins as a choice for Hannibal Lecter is like literally off the page from the book. They couldn't have picked a better Hannibal Lecter, except maybe somebody just a little bit, I don't know, somebody that had a little bit more. Um, what's a good word for this? Like I was thinking of someone who was a little bit bigger in stature than Anthony Hopkins. But Anthony Hopkins has the kind of presence on screen that only a person like he could bring to the character Hannibal Lecter. Um, there, I think that from just a retrospective standpoint, the Silence of the Lambs does something for adaptations that very few story to movie can do, and that is it makes the story almost more interesting to see it done in movie format, because once you've read the book and you understand what's going on in Hannibal's head, you're looking at Hannibal and you realize what is transpiring before it even transpires. I really, really like this. I did read Silence of the Lambs before. My kid says that that's why he was so weird, that he was born so weird, because I read Silence of the Lambs right before he was born. And I think the movie, it works on multiple different levels, but it's the faithfulness of the adaptation that I think works the best. So Silence of the Lambs gets my number 8 pick. It was done in 1991. Again, Anthony Hopkins, Jodie Foster. Ted Levine does a great character named Buffalo Bill. Man, he does not get enough credit for being that character. That was amazing. And Jack Crawford was a guy named Scott Glenn. Really, really excellent cast. And I feel like you almost can't like assemble a cast in that kind of perfection without really knowing the source material. So I give them a whole lot of credit for that particular piece. So Silence of the Lambs.
Now it's funny. I made a reference to this. I was driving one of my kids and their friends around the other day, and my friends or my kid's friend was like, "You need to put the lotion on. You need to put some
Ah,
lotion on." I'm like, "Okay, Buffalo Bill." Got some weird looks.
now, have you read
I have not
any
read
of
it.
the Thomas Harris
I have not
books?
read any of the anything from Thomas Harris. No.
So he has a very interesting writing style, which is, I think, a bit unique. Kind of like the way that when you read Michael Crichton, you feel unique about reading it. Same thing I think is true with Stephen King. Like you can identify it easily. And one of the things that he writes really well is the nefarious nature of psychological disorders as they affect real people. So in Red Dragon, it's all about Will, but in Silence of the Lambs, it's all about Clarice, and the journey that it takes them both on is so totally different because Will Graham breaks under the Hannibal pressure, and Clarice Starling base not only doesn't she break, but she ends up being beloved by Hannibal. So very interesting, very interesting. And just as a side note, um, although I love Silence of the Lambs as a movie, honestly, if you want to watch something that is absolutely killer in terms of the adaptation presentation in a series, go watch Hannibal. It's a TV series. It ran 3 seasons long. It is 1,000% worth every second that you spend watching it. It is the descent into madness between Will Graham and Hannibal in sort of this almost symbiotic relationship. It's really fabulous. So yes, I highly suggest it. So that's my number 8.
Excellent choice. Love the movie. As you could tell by the fact that I referenced it in conversation.
It's definitely part of our zeitgeist, isn't it?
Well, my number 8, I'm gonna say, is uh, it's impossible to judge the accuracy of its adaptation. It's not possible because my number 8, the story's never been told the same way twice. It's from 2005, directed by Garth Jennings. I'm talking about The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh.
And some of you might find it a little sacrilegious, maybe even a little shocking that it's my number 8. Well,
But
let's
don't
be.
panic. It's going to be okay.
Stole the words right from my lips. Actually,
Sorry.
right from the tattoo on my forearm. I don't have many tattoos, but don't panic. 42. That's what I have on my arm.
Okay, this
The
explains a lot of difference between you and I, Josh, because my tattoo is Tolkien's signature, and that's my only tattoo. So
Well, I still have a Blink 182 tattoo, but we're
it
not
tells
going
a
to talk
lot
about
about
that.
us.
But here, the story of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is it's almost as interesting as the actual Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because it started off as one thing. I believe it was radio play, turned into a lot of other things, a game, a BBC television production, all of these different mediums um, told Douglas Adams' wonderful story, and all of them changed details, uh, a lot of details, keeping mostly the bare minimum of Arthur and Ford need to leave the planet. They run into Zaphod and Trillian and Marvin, of course, and then they try to find. Well, they wind up on the Heart of Gold, of course, uh, and they have a run in with the Sword of Archfist and the mice. I'm not here to run down the story. The point is, the details are hardly ever the same, except for the basics of the story structure. It's always told slightly differently depending on the medium it's in, and that's fine. That's fine. Uh, but in that way, there is no definitive version of how to tell this story. So when once again it is time to adapt it for the big screen, Garth Jennings, he gets Martin Freeman, Zoe Deschanel, Sam Rockwell, the guy's a rock star, and Mos Def to fill out the main cast with Alan Rickman as the greatest android to ever live.
Irvin's great.
He had a lot of room to take creative liberties with the story. So that is why I started off with, is it a great adaptation of the book? It like I said, it follows the bones of the structure and then takes liberties with certain plot devices and settings and just paths of the characters. Of this, is it a great adaptation of the spirit? I'd say yeah. In the spirit of Douglas Adams, I think it was a pretty good adaptation where it follows that idea that you're not going to quote unquote faithfully tell this story in a new medium, because nobody's done that. Nobody's ever done that. Would it be nice though to have somebody put together the Hitchhiker's Guide in a way that is more identical to the books? I'd say only in the way that way we could get, like all 5 movies of the trilogy, and 6 if you want to count the last one that Adams didn't write. But that's kind of a sticking point for some Adams fans. So we'll just leave that there. But the reason why that it's on my list at all is because I believe that this is a highly enjoyable movie full of ridiculousness and zany antics, giving us really over the top performances. I'd say that even challenge the BBC TV predecessor, the miniseries, because what was done for the miniseries, it almost seems almost grounded in some ways with just the stiff upper lip Britishness of it. But Garth Jennings, he kind of let everybody go ham with their portrayals of the characters, and I think that works out better for the over the top way that the story unfolds. After all, at one point, in the book, there, someone turns into a penguin. Let's put it that way. The secret of flying is throw yourself out the ground and miss. That's the kind of funny that Douglas Adams brought, and it's not meant to be based in reality. It's meant to be just this grand, over the top belly laugh at points, which, in my humble opinion, seems almost anti-British with its humor at times, in the way that we'll say Monty Python, Also, Douglas Adams is, um, similarly regarded. And a lot of British comedy is that dry wit, that humor with the U. You know, it's it's that. The Hitchhiker's Guide just sends it straight over the top. And I think the last thing that I can really say, piggybacking off of your Rickman comment earlier, was how can you not love Alan Rickman doing Marvin? Brain the size of a bloody planet. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. And I loved every word that robot said. Uh, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is my number 8.
That's a good choice. I did a entire lesson plan structure for this particular book as an adaptation, or movie as an adaptation from the book, and it was really fun. I had a great time making that lesson plan. Really cool. Okay, my number 7. This book probably needs zero introduction because I feel like everybody knows this book. But it is also one of the, I think, kind of least seen movies that I can think of when I mention it. Because a lot of people end up reading this in high school or middle school or whatever, but they then don't actually see the movie, which is kind of sad because the movie is actually really good. It's called The Outsiders. Now, The Outsiders was released, it was published on April 23rd. That was my birthday. 1967. Now, this book is absolutely flawless in its execution. It basically follows the story of a character named Ponyboy Curtis, and Ponyboy Curtis is grappling with the times and trying to understand what I would call social injustice, but what I absolutely have come to understand as the moral ineptitude that we all have when we are teenagers, and how that translates into the choices that we make that then turn us into either good adults or adults that don't have a really good moral compass. um it really just follows about 2 weeks of Ponyboy's life, but a lot happens in those 2 weeks. And one of the things that happens is there is a murder, and it is the murder that happens between these two groups, right? There's the Soaks, who are the the socialites, and then there are there's the Greasers, and the Greasers are the world that Ponyboy first sort of feels like he identifies with, but then kind of doesn't understand. Where does he even fit in? He doesn't feel like he fits in anywhere. Hence the title, The Outsiders. He feels like he's an outsider. The movie does such a phenomenal job of being truly authentic to the source material in a way that is, I think, leveling for all the characters. It really gives the characters a chance to shine. Even though some of the things don't quite happen the way that they happen in the book, it still feels very authentic to the book. Every time something happens, you recognize a small piece of something that was supposed to be happening in the book. um I give this book so much love. It's a coming of age story, but it's also almost a story of understanding the philosophy of what it means to be a good person in life, and all of the tangled ideas that are attached to that. And it does so in a way that is thoughtful and thought provoking, but also it exposes sort of the soft underbelly of what it felt like to be a teenager that didn't fit on in any big social group, and then how to uh kind of reassess the world in a way that will make sense. It's very poignant, it's very emotional, but it's really, really good. And again, movie wise, this was a great movie. I loved it a lot. So Outsiders, The Outsiders, not Outsiders, The Outsiders gets my number 7 pick. Really, really good book. Did you ever read that when you were in high school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing book, and quite frankly, I am quite shocked, I tell you, that I hadn't thought of putting it on my list.
Ah, it's so good. I mean, like I can still, what a book is good when you can still remember how you felt when you read it, right? Because not every book. I mean, I have literally read thousands of books over the course of my lifetime. I mean, that's not even hyperbole, but I don't remember. In fact, some books even blend together. And like, if you ask me the plot of a Stephen King story, I might confuse it with another Stephen King story or whatever. But some books have this, like, they have fish hooks that just tear right into you, and you remember exactly how you felt when you read it. And that's what The Outsiders does to me.
Just remember,
Coincidentally,
nothing gold can stay, bunny girl.
coincidentally, my number 6 is also a rip your soul out of your body and put it back in story. So, yeah, I seem to be on a jag with those.
So we are on my number 7.
On your number 7.
My number 7, speaking of Stephen King,
Ooh,
I could have done an entire list of Stephen King books turned into
we really
movies.
should. We really should make a list of Stephen King's.
Maybe we will. Whenever we should find out when his birthday is, and then let him know we're gonna do tribute to you, and then he'll just ignore it and act like we never exist.
No, he won't. All
I
right.
know
Anyway.
he's gonna want to be on the show like always. He's like, I got a list, guys. I'm like, Mr. King, with all due respect, the show has 2 people on it, and we like to keep it that way. And he's like, oh man.
Yeah, when you're famous, that's just what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But my number 7, speaking of Stephen King, is a title that we've talked about before. I'm not gonna, wax poetic about, what makes it great, because quite frankly, when I read the story, I was like, God, well, that's a whole lot of nothing. And that's the thing about Stephen King. It's not that he writes bad stories sometimes. It just he he writes really well, so much that sometimes it's just you're reading good writing, but it's hard to explain. Gerald's Game from 2017, directed by Mike Flanagan.
Oh, good choice. Good choice.
I didn't care for the book.
Really?
I didn't dislike it. I
Oh, I
didn't like
liked
it,
it.
but I
I liked
read
it.
it and I'm like, there's nothing here for me to kind of identify with, right? It's nothing's really speaking to me. And the fact that, spoilers for the book, it's a crossover with, what was it, Dolores Claiborne?
Yeah, Dolores Claiborne.
That made me go, holy crap! What that? So there's like in this whole thing, which, again, not a discussion we're going to have right now. The idea though that when this movie was made, when it was announced, when it came out, I had this thought in my head that, like, how the whole movie is her handcuffed to a bed with her husband on top of her. How do you turn that into like a 100-minute, story to tell on film? Because at least in the book, you have her thoughts, you have, her memories to really play back to, and you have some really, really kind of messed up stuff going on in her past. With turning that, making an adaptation of that seemed not only a daunting task, but it seemed darn well impossible. But because it's a Stephen King adaptation, I had to give it a shot. I had to. I had no other choice. Stephen King is, top 5 favorite authors for me, so I had to go there, and I did, and I absolutely adored this movie. Not just because of the way it was shot. It was shot so well. I couldn't imagine how it could be done any other way now. But there were moments in it that seemed absolutely brutal that I had in my mind hadn't even considered that somebody would go to. It was just not even a thought in my head that such graphic detail from this story that I thought was okay could come alive so much that it just reeled me in. Mike Flanagan was able to tell this story visually that grabbed me in a way that um, the written word couldn't. I don't know what the separation was for me in the original book, but the movie, when I watched it, I said, I get it now. Gerald's Game, I think, is incredibly underrated when it comes to not only stories of its like and stories from King, but just on the great pantheon of literary adaptations. It's one of those few times where, at least for me, it made it easier to digest the story being told, and that's why it's my number seven.
Nice. I will say this about Gerald's Game, and that is that the movie, uh, that the movie adaptation, much like the movie that also with Stephen King, 1912, does the same thing. They are both movies that absolutely are almost better as movies as they than they are as book pieces. And that's really rare to say for Stephen King, because typically Stephen King's books are like, oh, it was such a great book. I can't believe that when they adapted it, it turned so terrible. What happened? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's like literally every Stephen King adaptation. But 1912 and Gerald's Game do something a little bit different, where they take the source material and they truly twist it in a way that makes it make sense for the audience. And I think part of it is splitting it into proper act 1, act 2, and act 3 for a film audience. And so the story takes on a structure that it just doesn't have in the original source. So I think that that does actually make a lot of sense. So good choice, really good choice.
Thank you.
Okay, my number 6 is a movie that okay, first of all, I need to give you a slight bit of background. I am a religious, or no, I'm not religious. I religiously check uh, this one website called Does the Dog Die? And it's not so much that I mind if the dog dies as much as I just want to know. I need to steel myself so that I know if this is going to happen. I need to know. I don't really know when that happened, but it did start becoming like a thing that I do. So long before we had Does the Dog Die, you just had to watch a movie to find out if something bad happened to the dog. And I was a little kid when I watched this movie. It's called Sounder. Now, Sounder uh was released in 1972, so quite some time ago. And it is based on a Newbery winning award winning story by the same name, Sounder. Now, I saw the movie Sounder as a kid, but I went back as, I guess, a young adult. I think I was like maybe 15 or 16. And I saw it in the library and I was like, oh, I saw this movie. I should read it. And I picked up the book. And honestly, the book is really faithful to the movie, or the movie is faithful to the book. Um, it tells the story of this family that they're sharecroppers in the very deep south, and the truly horrific situation of their economics is just, it's awful. I mean, there's no good way to say what they're experiencing other than it's just absolutely terrible. It's the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, sharecroppers in particular had it very, very, very hard. And these people are, they're black, and that it makes it even worse, obviously, because they are facing racial tensions, they are facing the economic hardship, and they're facing sort of, the issue of feeling like there's no hope while maintaining the illusion that there is hope for their kids. And I didn't realize that as a kid, but as a young adult when I read Sounder, I was very impressed by the ideas that were being put forth. It was almost like I saw the movie before I could absorb what the big ideas that were happening there, and somehow they still were pervasive in my mind, and I just recognized exactly what they were when I read the book. Um, this movie stars Cicely Tyson, and Paul Winfield. And now this movie also got a ton of Oscar nominations. I don't think it won any Oscars, but it was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay. It was also nominated for a Best Original Score. The Directors Guild of America nominated it for directorial achievement. I mean, it absolutely rocked. The soundtrack won a Grammy. That's how awesome it was. Um, Honestly, there aren't too many movies that I have seen that translate as well as this one did from book to movie. They did change up a couple things, but n- enough enough to sort of make the movie make sense, because Sounder is the dog. Okay, so we get a whole story from Sounder, or of Sounder, that is sort of a it's beautiful because so much of our story is sort of like from the perspective of the dog, and it's just it's amazing the way that it gets told. um there's a part of this story, and I'll just, kind of clue everybody in so you don't have to worry about it, where the dog, it looks like the dog gets shot. And he does. He's hurt. But don't worry, there's good things ahead for Sounder. It's also one of the few books that I had read at the time that didn't end with all hope is lost when it came to anything about Black people. Anything that was African American, whenever I read it, was always like, okay, it's doom, it's gloom, it's terrible. The world is going to end and there is no hope. Just forget anything that you've read that is. And this book, and I'm not saying that it ends Pollyanna, because it doesn't. I mean, it's things are still hard, but it ends in a way that makes you realize that it is possible to keep going despite the fact that hardship and adversity continue to wear you down. And I especially liked that because I think at the time that I read this book, I needed to get that message, and it instantly transported me back to the movie, and it just felt good. In fact, one of my favorite lines from the book goes like this. Um, uh, there was no price that could be put on Sounder's voice. It filled up the night and made music as the branches of all the trees were being pulled across silver strings. I loved that. I loved it so much because that is exactly what the relationship between the family, the boy, here, which they gave the boy a name in the movie, but the boy, in when you think about him from Sounder's standpoint, it's that relationship, that close, undeniable relationship that really made this movie work. If you like movies like Where the Red Fern Grows, and Old Yeller, you know, this movie has that feel, except the dog does not die, so you can, everything's okay. But it has that feel to it. Like there is something undeniable about that bond that just exists, and it's coming of age in a way that is different from perhaps your normal perspective, because unlike The Outsiders, even though they are also dealing with, a lot of socioeconomic issues, Sounder is really dealing with socioeconomic issues with the gigantic layer of racism on top of it. And it really makes for an extremely well put together book and movie. And again, it won a Newbery Award. It is truly astounding good fiction. And it doesn't matter that it's, that it's made for young adult. It is absolutely great for adults to read too. So Sounder gets my number 6 choice.
No, I didn't read it. No, I haven't seen the movie.
Yeah, this is one that I don't even know if most people have heard of. At least not people that I know of. Because but it is. I mean, honestly, if you're in librarian circles, of course you know Sound, because it's one of those kids books that sort of everybody knows about. But as a
Mhm.
movie, when they put this movie together, just as a quick anecdote, when they put this movie together, they absolutely did not believe that it was going to do uh, anything at all. They thought it was going to do terrible because they thought, and this means Hollywood in general, thought that if or when they released this movie, that it was basically going to be like relegated to the dusty shelves because nobody wanted to watch a story that was this sad or that had this many layers of racial tension in it. And they wanted black exploitation movies, they wanted black action movies. It was the early 70s. They nobody thought that it could be successful as an actual drama. The budget for this movie, and remember it was 1972, but the budget for this movie was $1.9 million, and it brought in $16.9 million. So it made a really good showing on the investment, and I would say that it did really well for its time.
And that's good. Of course, I've heard of the story. Yeah, never really. Just I hadn't read it. Yeah.
I don't know if it's in the Paramount catalog right now for streaming, but it is in the Paramount catalog of movies. So if you get a chance to see it, it is really worth it. I mean, it made it to my number 6 for a really good reason. Like, this is good adaptation material.
What what year was that?
1972.
Okay, so I added the right one to your letterbox list. That's good. That's good.
Sweet. Sweet, sweet, sweet. And great soundtrack. If you can listen to the soundtrack, it's so
Oh,
good.
you know what? That reminds me. I didn't even get into the fact that Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet has a banging soundtrack.
It does. It does. It kicks. No doubt about that.
So my number 6 is also a more contemporary story, and one of the weird things about this adaptation is the fact that it actually changes some of the, well, sort of everything in a way. My number 6 is Ready Player One.
Oh.
2018, directed by Steven Spielberg. Now, for those of you familiar with the book, it was released, I believe it was released independently a few years back, gained steam, and, kind of garnered this following to where suddenly a lot of people in the right places were reading it. And when there was talk of having it turned into a movie and Steven Spielberg was brought on, there was a genuine excitement. But the thing is, the book, while filled with a lot of, classic gaming references, the film goes in a sort of different direction. While there are some, uh, the the details of the story, I should say, are mostly cinematic, which I don't have a problem with at all, especially when uh, you have a studio and a director that have such a long and storied history that you could put in these references and not even have to really pay a whole lot of extra for it. I'm sure that some of it had to do with being able to get the rights to the things mentioned in the story, but I would almost have to say that because of the changing medium, much like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it sort of works better if you're using movie references in a movie. After all, you were able to get the Iron Giant in there, the DeLorean, and be able to do these things that are just really cool, that really shouldn't ever be seen anywhere. All these clashing pop icon things. Steven Spielberg takes the story, makes it more of a love letter to movies rather than gaming, but still tells the same basic story of there's a prize, there's a competition, and this guy wants to win it, even though he's from the poor side of town, as it were. And it goes into the friendships that he makes with people online, which, if you're listening to this show, you might have some experience with that. I know I do, Jen. It's um,
Mhm.
really a sweet story at its core, but it's also filled with some great action and a lot of stick to the man stuff because the the mega corporations want to take control over everything for themselves. But this group of ragtag, reluctant heroes has to do what they can do, not for power, not for riches, really, but for the love of the platform, the love of the creator, and the love of the hunt. Ready Player One is a very fun movie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend it entirely, and that's why it's my number six.
All right. That I, I I don't know. I guess I have reservations about it, but yeah, I mean, that was definitely a good book. I did like that book.
Hmm.
Um. Okay. Uh. Okay. This is contentious, and I know it's contentious, and yet I feel like it still is super important here. Um.
Objection.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. You might want to. Um. So my number five in the top five is a movie that was released. I believe it was released in 1976. I don't remember exactly. I'll have to go look it up. But um, it was called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Now, on its face, the movie, if you haven't read the book, the movie seems to be about um, it seems to be about one patient. It really isn't. The story, the novel, is actually narrated by the Native American patient who pretends to be deaf. And he's basically narrating the whole story. Now we don't get that in the film. And I understand why. It would be really difficult to narrate, well, to present the film from that perspective. I do understand why they made that adaptation change, but the adaptation itself is fairly genuine to what I think is the genuine tone of the book. What it's really about, how it's about, and the characters, they do change a bit, but the again, the tone and the overall story feel very authentic to the book. Um i i, I will say that one of the things that I really love about the story One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the book, is this idea that there is very little daylight between the people who are running this institution, which is a mental institution, and the people who are the patients in the mental institution. Now, there's a lot that sort of happens with a character named Nurse Ratched. And there's even a well, I think it's Netflix. I can't remember. There was a series that was based entirely around Nurse Ratched and how she basically got to the point that she is at in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's interesting because there is this sort of dynamic between the patients and her, which is, you know, horribly uh, it goes awry on so many levels. You know, she's trying to assert basically her control over them. They kind of understand that that's what's happening and try to subvert it. Um, it is super interesting on many different psychological levels, and there is definitely some very difficult content in this. Um, I I think that there is an idea here, which, once again, we're dealing with a time in history when mental health was not looked at the way that it is looked at today, or has been, for the past 15, 20 years. And it was almost dirty. Like, you don't talk about that stuff. You put people away for that. Now, we have gone to great lengths to get rid of institutions exactly like this. And we certainly don't do lobotomies on people anymore, but there was a kind of a pervasive thought that controlling people and keeping them calm and peaceful and serene was the goal of mental health therapy. And you just keep seeing that over and over and over again, with the use of drugs and not being agitated and being chained down, and and it becomes this huge power struggle. It's really, really interesting altogether. But the I think the book and the movie are really well complemented together, because one, the movie does a good job of telling the story, but two, the book sort of fills in a lot of gaps that you really should experience from the perspective of what's happening in the institution that you kind of can't in the movie. You can't get there um, without written word and imagination. So it is very interesting on that score. But I do I have to call out one thing here, and that is there is, I think, a kind of like an almost want to be redemptive arc here that kind of falls flat on its face, because the whole story of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is really altogether um it's a dichotomy, and there are a lot of things happening that prevent redemptive arcs from taking place, even when they are wanted and strived for, and a lot of it has to do with institutionalism. It's a really good it's not just a good movie, it's a really good book. It takes my number 5 spot for being excellent on both scores. Even if it's not a perfect adaptation, it really does get the source content right in terms of, what it's supposed to bring forward and how it's supposed to bring it forward. So number 5, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Amazing movie.
Have you ever read the book?
No.
It's kind of scary. And I don't mean scary like a horror movie. I mean, like, it's kind of psychologically frightening to imagine yourself in a situation where you have lost so much control over every aspect of your life. You're not in prison, but you might as well be. And it's almost even scarier than prison, because people don't treat you like human beings. They treat you like you are mentally deranged. Yeah, it's actually really good. So
Maybe I'll give it a check out at
It's
some
short
point.
too. It's not a really long book. It's it's a quick read. He's his The writing style is very it's not like it's not heavy. It's not hard.
So it
You could
flows.
read yeah, you could read One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in a weekend.
Cool. Okay. Give that make a note of that. And there we go. And in the meantime, it's time to break into my top five. Now, this might come as a surprise to some people, but I enjoy movies. I
Mm.
also enjoy books. Sometimes I enjoy when one turns into the other. Sometimes I have no affinity for the uh, original source material. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm just kind of indifferent to it. Now that I've just needlessly explained all the ways you can feel about stuff, my number five is The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, I've often wondered, since we have such a fine version that was told in schools and made for like $17, why did we need a new one from Andrew Adamson in 2005? Well, I'll tell you why. Because, quite frankly, it was high time for someone to try to adapt this series. That's right, it's a series of books. I sound really condescending. It's a series of books. Some of you might not have known that. Um, wow, I sound like a
Josh does not
jerk.
ever sound condescending. That's my job.
Exactly. I'm taking over your gimmick, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. But the Chronicles of Narnia are a series of stories about this mystical land called Narnia, heaven, and it is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is, as it says in the title, about a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe. More so, it's about these these children that find themselves uh, transported to this land where they have to free it from an evil white witch, and then people die for candy, and it's a whole big thing. Although, are Turkish delights a candy or just a sweet treat? We could really get into the
It,
weeds with this.
it's wartime. Rations are few and far between, and anything that tastes even a little bit sweet is really special to the kids because it's so rare. So, because I know a lot of
Okay.
people who are like, Turkish delight is terrible. You know what? You did not live in wartime, and you do not know what rations are.
Again, not again, but yes, very true. Um, because of the war, things weren't as readily available, and people did have to sacrifice a lot. But they went to this magical world, fought off the witch, da 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 da. What makes this, I think, a good adaptation is not just the fact that they hired actual actors to perform in it, rather than whoever they just picked up off the street. But I'm I'm sorry, I'm only dragging the original adaptation because I thought it would be funny. That's it. The original is also an enjoyable romp, but I think just the updated special effects, the exceptional way that it was shot, actually focusing on things like cinematography instead of having this. I mean, quite frankly, when you make something for TV, you do have to keep in mind a lot of restrictions, so you don't get a chance to show us beautiful vistas and amazing panorama shots, because sometimes you just don't have time for that. Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the 2005 version, it gives you the things that you would expect from a cinematic adaptation. You get to see more of the world because you are not handcuffed by television adaptation, television rules for run times and whatnot. The thing is, the two are absolutely comparable as adaptations go when it comes to the source material. They both do, I think, a pretty good job. As someone that has read the book on a few occasions, even though, again, every time I read it, I'm like, "Will I feel something this time?" Turns out, no. But I still read it, and when I watch the movie, I, much like Gerald's Game, tend to connect with it a little better. But perhaps that has to do with the reading the series and honestly being really disappointed with the lackluster conclusion to the whole story that made me think slightly less of the books over the the films. The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a worthy watch. I just wish that somebody uh, would have showed up to the theaters to make sure that we can get the complete saga done in this exceptional way. That's why it's my number five.
Well, interestingly, he was one of Tolkien's inklings. They were all best buddies, and there's no qualm and no question about the fact that this is 100% a metaphor for uh, the life well, the life and martyrdom of Christ. So, I mean, sometimes I think that as we read into fantasy epics, we forget the same way that we also forget the same thing about horror movies, that they are mostly metaphors for something else. And sometimes it can be, I think, really difficult to read into stories when those pieces are just not there. I mean, you can deconstruct a story really well, but if the quintessential pieces aren't there, they're just not there. Although I will say that the Chronicles of Narnia is one of the best written children's trilogies that there are. I mean, it really is from a language standpoint, it is crafted beautifully. There is something amazing about the flow of language throughout the Chronicles of Narnia. It's gorgeous. But but the story is the story. And I will say that I think the Chronicles of Narnia launched a lot of children's fantasy, which we may really not have unless we had had the Chronicles of Narnia first. I think about the Golden Compass, and I think that is a perfect example of this came from Narnia. It's not that it is a Narnia story, but it is the kind of story that was paved for or paved by the Chronicles of Narnia. So, yeah. Um okay. I am going to move on to my number 4. So, once again, I'm moving back in time. These just happen to be the picks. What can I say? 1967. 1967, there was this great book that was written, phenomenal if you have not read it. It literally launched the horror genre of fiction, or I shouldn't say launched it, but launched it in a way that it became super popular, that people were actually picking up horror novels as, oh hey, I'm going to read this, instead of squirreling it away and reading it when nobody else was around because you were too embarrassed to admit that this is what you were reading. um it was called Rosemary's Baby. Now, it would take a couple of years for Rosemary's Baby, the film, to come out, but 1967 was when the book was first written. Now, this is really, to me, this is, well, actually, I guess it didn't take that long. It took like a year. Um, there are some things in the book that are not mentioned in the movie, but there are things that I think they obviously they cut out for time sequence, but there are things that they get so right, right? They get the neighbors Minnie and Roman so right. Um and basically, if you don't know the story of Rosemary's Baby, I don't know where you've been forever, but Rosemary's Baby is the story of a couple that move into this very gothic style apartment complex. Like it's really, it feels gothic. In the book, it's, they point out all of these crazy things. They also point out that they have heard a lot of stories. The couple has heard a lot of stories about murders and rituals and things that have happened in the building. And, they play it off and just go, oh, okay, well, whatever, obviously that didn't happen. And, people are just trying to scare us because this is good real estate in New York City. Um, and they move into this place. Rosemary wants to have a baby. Her husband Guy does not. And eventually they meet these neighbors, Minnie and Roman. Minnie and Roman basically convince the two of them, yeah, it's a great time to have a baby. Turns out Minnie and Roman are not who they really say that they are, and they are kind of involved in, let's just say, something a little bit more satanic than being just nice neighbors. Um, Rosemary goes through a really difficult pregnancy, craves raw meat. They feed her these like really crazy, terrible tasting meals and supplements and whatever. And they even send her to their own hand-picked doctor. It is truly kind of an original, or maybe not an original, but a very specific story of gaslighting. And they do it so well to Rosemary, and she is left both questioning her sanity and questioning what is happening to her. What, still thinking that the baby is perfectly fine and that everything is good. Um, in the end, Rosemary's Baby has just a crazy twist, which, when you first see the movie, you're like, wow, this is kind of crazy. But when you read the book, it's even, oh man, the descriptions are really over the top. They're super good. And I will say that this movie definitely made a fabulous, fabulous clean adaptation from the book. Some things did change, but most things are really just picked directly from the novel. Now, it helps that Rosemary's Baby was the that the entire film um, is is Roman Polanski at his best. So it's, I mean, you get that, which is sort of, his artistic version of things, which honestly is stunning. But you also get this source material, which with Roman Polanski's vision just absolutely is terrifying. I absolutely love this movie, and I think that it is a phenomenal adaptation. Just in case you didn't know, uh, the writer for Rosemary's Baby, a man named Ira Levin, Ira Levin, he died. Can't remember when he died, but I don't think it was like a long time ago. Um, I'm trying to remember. It was in the early 2000s. But he wrote a follow up to Rosemary's Baby called Son of Rosemary, and it didn't do nearly as well in terms of being like well critically received. And Son of Rosemary didn't even come out until 1997, so it took a long time for him to write this. But basically what happens is Rosemary wakes up and she's in this nursing home kind of a place, and she's been in a coma since 1973. So it's super interesting. The follow up to Rosemary's Baby, Son of Rosemary, is a really good read, and also kind of twisty turny. So definitely worth watching. But Rosemary's Baby gets my number 4 pick.
Also, a very good movie.
There, yeah, I really liked it. Did you also know that there was a TV adaptation to Son of Rosemary?
I had no idea.
And it starred Zoe Saldana. Zoe Saldana. I can never say her name right.
That is information to me I had gotten.
Right? I mean, like, it's one of those things that whenever I say it to people, they go, "Wait, what?" Like they do that weird Scooby Doo, huh, kind of a thing. It was a two
Oh,
part. It was a two-part series that came out in 2014, and honestly, it's not bad. I mean, it's not Roman Polanski, but in terms of like getting the stuff that we get from the book, yeah, it's not bad. So definitely something to check out if you ever get a chance.
okay. I'm gonna have to look it up. That's falling under something that I have to look up very quickly. Um, but in the meantime, I guess number four.
Number 4.
Number four. This one also comes from a series, but it's not the first in the series. It's not the last in the series. Usually, that's when everyone's like, "These were the best." It was either began great and went downhill, or it ends with such a bang that you can't help but fall in love with the entire story all over again. No, I went with one that wasn't either of those. In fact, it's I believe it was the third, third, third movie slash book. I, I'm sorry, but these things come out or came out in such um, a way that you have to go. Why didn't they just put numbers on them? I don't know. Anyway, I'm talking about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Oh.
And literary adaptations. You have to, and at least I had to put in a Harry Potter movie because I do enjoy that universe. And all feelings about the fictional creator aside, no, I'm sorry, that was nope, that was appropriate. All that aside, I will say that the reason why the Prisoner of Azkaban, the third part of this septology, is that a word?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the third part of this, well, I guess there were 8 movies. See, all of this is just confusing. That's why I chose the third one. There you go. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the first movie that Chris Columbus didn't direct because not because Chris Columbus is not talented. He's incredibly talented. He gave us these wonderful worlds full of light energy and whimsicality. I wish I had the button ready to show the T-shirt. And really gave us a place to live in when it came to when it came to fictional places like Hogwarts or London. You know, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban 2004 brought on Alfonso Cuarón, who you might remember from Itu Mama Tambien, and this is the first movie in the series that takes a distinctively dark turn based on the events of the story, where there is an escaped madman from uh, by the name of Sirius Black. I'm not going to go into all these story spoilers, but he has long ties to Harry Potter and his parents, and the Dementors start. You know what? again, this is one of those things where once you start pulling a thread, you just keep going down the hole. And I mixed metaphors, but I don't care. The thing is, this is the first movie in this series that showed what would be um, the ability to tell Harry Potter stories with a mature tone and under the guidance of a darker director, someone that can take the damaging story and just the sort of twisted details and really put it on screen while at the same time maintaining the believability that Chris Columbus built for the world before him. It's not easy to take a series that someone not just has one but two movies under his belt, and then continue that in a way to where, yes, you notice the tonal shift, but you're easily believing it's still the same world. I honestly think if Warner Brothers had any sense at all, this would have been their take with the DC universe, giving us the uh, starting off with a light and cheerful before taking a dark turn, instead of basically giving us um, darkness from the beginning and then going darker before getting lighter. It's weird, but it's all under the same house. The ideas for how things should be shot in a series have always been there. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban uh, understood the assignment when it comes to allowing these now slightly older actors um, more range for the emotions that each character is kind of growing into as well. Um, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is my personal favorite in the series, and that is why it is my number four.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is definitely it's an interesting choice. I think it is an interesting choice. I don't I read all the Harry Potter books back when my kids were young, and I don't know. I have a complicated history with Harry Potter, so and in terms of the movies, I always I felt a lot like in Harry Potter movies the same way I felt about Lord of the Rings. I felt like there was just so much that was egregiously torn out in order to
Mm-hmm.
make us feel somehow more invested in Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Like we're invested. We're here. Stop. We don't really need any more of this. What we need is, and Prisoner of Azkaban, I think, does a better job because they split it up into different sections. And also, honestly, Bellatrix, just absolutely stellar. I friggin' love. I love the whole idea behind how Hagrid gets to Azkaban. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. It's just, man, I always hate how much they leave out. Blah, drives me nuts.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
think in the comparison to Lord of the Rings, real quick, um, you're absolutely right. Because during my breakdown of Fellowship, I mentioned that Peter Jackson had the uphill battle of bringing in the mainstream audience to an IP that um, was not uh, part of pop culture. It was part of nerd culture, if you will.
mm-hmm.
Um, but when Harry Potter was turned into film, they didn't have that uh, that struggle. They didn't have that battle because Harry Potter, the books, were very much a part of pop culture.
Right.
So
Right.
it might have been in their best interest to leave in some of the some of the stuff that they didn't feel necessary for the films.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. Well, I'm going to move on to my number three. My number three is another book and movie that need zero introduction. Everybody knows both the book and the movie. You probably read the book when you were in school if you are in the US. And much like Sounder, it has a lot of Deep South racial overtones and um, the inability for people to want to embrace and see change. And it also has moral righteousness in it. I am talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, To Kill a Mockingbird also was 100% as a movie. I think one of the best adaptations that could have been done. For anyone who hasn't read To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus is a lawyer and he is charged with representing a man who happens to be black. Uh, and the the idea here is something more than just the social injustice of the South. It is also understanding that uh, that the two main characters who are kids, well, I guess I mean Atticus is a main character, but the two characters um, that we sort of see a lot through Scout and Gem are truly the epitome of innocence and 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 have not formed the sense of racial hatred toward other people that has so permeated the town and kind of takes over. um it's quite interesting the things that Atticus tells Scout, the things that Atticus tells Jem, the things that Jem tells Scout, the entire relationship in the family, and then with Boo Radley down the street and the hollow tree and finding things. And there is something that is both innocent and a kind of, not just a coming of age, because it's not really coming of age, but like a maturing sense out of this movie and book that does justice all around. Also, the character of Atticus Finch is one of my favorite characters in literature, period. I just absolutely love how both stalwart and righteous he is, while also understanding that what he's doing is truly dangerous. And he's still willing to take that on. He's still willing to stand up for what's right. It's so refreshing. I mean, I feel like we have moved a lot into, rightly so, because don't get me wrong, I'm not preaching or creating some kind of moral bent for not doing this, but we have a lot of characters who have so much gray space, so much space for them to be morally nebulous in their presentation, that it's refreshing to read and be a part of a world where the lines of right and wrong are right in front of us, and all we have to do is see them. We just have to see what is correct. And I feel like um the whole discovery that Scout makes with Jem about Boo Radley is all about that. It's all about thinking that things are one way and then seeing that they are another, experiencing that they are another. And this is a direct metaphor with racism as well. It's understanding that just because you see something, just because you've heard the story, it does not mean that the story is true. It means sometimes that you have to discover for yourself what is real and not real. Um, there's just something magical about this whole thing. I just love it. So the movie itself is, I think, a really excellent adaptation of the book, and Harper Lee is an absolute gem in contemporary American literature. I mean, just it's beautiful. It's an amazing story. I remember reading this when I was in grade school, and I was just blown away by it. I was so impacted by this. And then when I got to see the movie, I don't remember even for a second thinking that there was something that was like super left out, little pieces, here and there. But, and again, I think the biggest advantage that we have is just reading inner monologue, understanding thoughts and being able to kind of get a better perspective on what was happening. But overall, the movie does a phenomenal job of telling the story directly from the book. So, number three to me is To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, I would go on and on about this movie, but I don't feel like we need to. It is just everybody knows the story To Kill a Mockingbird, and and even if you don't know the story, you've probably seen pieces of this. To Kill a Mockingbird is absolutely one of those movies that is protected under the Library of Congress as being important for cultural or historic reasons, and rightly so, because it is absolutely perfect. Love it, love it, love it.
Excellent choice.
Yeah, I love this movie so much.
Well, I'm at number 3, I guess.
Number three.
And just for the sake of what's the word, transparency, I will say I did make a slight alteration to my order of list just now, which changed by number 3. So there's that.
Okay.
My number 3 is, well, quite frankly, there's no reason to tease. It's 1993's Jurassic Park from Steven Spielberg, based on the book by Michael Crichton. You know what it is. It's dinosaurs. What you might not have known is the book was a little different. It had, different people live, die. There, it was far more brutal, I think, in the book as far as the deaths go. But hey, you got to keep that. Keep that rating right. Otherwise, you're gonna have a hard R, Jurassic Park movie that you can't take kids to. So naturally, some things had to be toned down and, quite frankly, changed for the betterment at least, in my opinion, as far as some of the characters that lived and died. Jurassic Park does one of those interesting things where they can get away with changing some events from the book to more streamline an almost better story. I think Michael Crichton did a wonderful job writing this book, but this was, of course, a Steven Spielberg film. A Steven Spielberg film that, quite frankly, deserves its spot in the pantheon of great science fiction, great monster movies, if you want to go that far. I'm not going to go into the details of what Jurassic Park is about. Like I said, if you're listening to this podcast, you already know. I will say that the reason why it's my number 3 and not higher, because it was higher, I lowered it a bit, is when it comes time to pick and choose the details that you want to honor from the source material and the details you want to change. And sometimes you get it right. And I think this is one of those times. Sometimes, much like Jen's views on the Lord of the Rings, and sometimes mine on the Harry Potter series, you just omit things that, while helps the runtime, you just really wish you could see it play out on screen. Jurassic Park doesn't really have those moments for me from the book that made me miss them from the film. Unlike Sphere, where it's like, why did you Anyway, Jurassic Park is my number 3. It's an all-time classic. That's it.
All right. Very good. Very good choice. I almost picked Jurassic Park, but then decided not to. Just because, yeah, I was a little bit salty about some of the stuff that, yeah, was like, I don't know. I don't know. I just feel like they changed some stuff in Jurassic Park, and it seems silly, but whatever. I was just being nitpicky, I guess. Also, I had a lot of other movies on my list, so.
Yeah.
Um, okay, my number two is okay. This one, uh, I have a difficult time with this one. Okay, I put it as my number two, and I mean it's purposeful, but adaptation is so difficult with this particular type of storytelling. Um, this particular type of storytelling is called epistolary. And epistolary storytelling is the type where characters are engaging in either letters to each other, or sometimes, like in Little House on the Prairie, where you're reading diary entries. And then there might be, some narration around that or whatever. But most of the meat of the story is in these letters that go back and forth between people. And this is particularly difficult to create in movie narrative because unless you have very heavy over narration, in which case that can sometimes really um, disrupt the idea of beginning, middle, and end in storytelling, and also divide our understanding and loyalties about who we're supposed to be or who are supposed to be the protagonists and who are supposed to be antagonists or how we're supposed to view the world. It can be very difficult, anyways, I guess all I'm saying. So, the novel that I'm talking about is The Color Purple. And The Color Purple, as a book, is basically told in these series of exchanged letters. And there's quite a bit of other things that are going on here too, but we get the primary understanding of what's happening in the book through that. Now, when it was adapted, the adaptation, it talks about the letters, and eventually the main character Celie discovers that there are all these letters from her sister that her husband basically took away and didn't give her the chance to see. And it kind of works pretty well in the movie to really make him um absolutely terrible. I can't. There are things in The Color Purple that are like the naked truth of things that are painful and difficult, and yet we are better people for understanding that this existed. And I don't say that lightly. I truly believe that we sometimes shield ourselves, myself included, because it's hard to confront the horror perpetrated upon each other, um, or upon, as in The Color Purple, a group of people who are already subjugated, who are already extremely put upon, and to see their lives crumbling because because of the violence and the terribleness of the nature of that. But then also to understand that there is this overarching sense of family purpose and hope related to love. And it's powerful. It's an absolutely astonishing book. But the movie does, I think, something that the book doesn't even do. And that's crazy because you'd think that that would make it not in my list, but it augments the purpose behind the relationship of Celie and Shug, behind the story of Harpo and Sophia, who are main characters on their own. Harpo is the son of Celie and the man that she ends up marrying. Um, and there are things that kind of happen here which are terrible, and yet they're the confronting them is like so incredibly important. Now, I'm going to say one thing about The Color Purple, the movie, right? I sometimes feel like white people, because that's the only way I can say it, sometimes see the color purple and and have this um I don't know what the word is exactly, and I'm so sorry that I'm stumbling over this at the moment, but there is a type of almost moral righteousness that a lot of people have um when they watch the color purple and say, well, god, at least we're not like that. That's terrible. And it's not true either. We are just as terrible to each other. We just don't narrate it sometimes as poignantly here. And also, we're not dealing with the same things. And sometimes I just get like so like upset that a lot of people, when they watch the color purple, miss the point of the color purple completely. The point of the color purple is not to extol violence or to create a sense of hopeless despair among people who were experiencing racism and the true, crippling sense of economic disparity. It's not that. The point of the color purple is hope. And specifically, it's hope through family. It's the fact that you can split a family apart by oceans, and you can still maintain the strong, fierce value of love and care between people. And and that never disappears. It never goes away. It's always there. Even if you don't know it's there, it's there. And that, there's something beautiful about that. There's something absolutely just, I don't know, it's gorgeous. It's just really an amazing thing. um there's a lot of changes in the adaptation from the book. And there's a lot of superfluous additions to the movie that aren't even in the book, but they fit, they work, they are absolutely to the movie story's um betterment. They, don't detract at all from what I think the story is supposed to be telling, and that makes it just perfect. On top of that, honestly, everybody's performance is unbelievably well acted. There is something so incredible about watching all these people on screen that absolutely make you weep on multiple levels. Weep with joy, weep with sadness, weep with anger, feel, really feel. The color purple made me absolutely feel on every single level. And when I saw The Color Purple as a movie, I did not understand that it had been created. Well, I mean, guess I knew that it was created by a book, but I didn't. I hadn't even thought about going to read the book because I just figured that it would be like what the movie was. It's not. It the adaptation does a phenomenal job of telling the story of The Color Purple, but to read the book is an experience all by itself, and it's truly worthy. So the film does the book a solid by being standard storytelling, but the book itself is just a creature of its own making, and really seriously worth reading. I mean, it's just, it that is good fiction. It definitely is. Apparently it's very contentious in a lot of circles because of the level of violence that it depicts, but also the type of violence that it depicts. Obviously there is some sexual violence. There is also violence sort of like against the human body, which I guess a lot of people find very difficult to read. But it is wonderful in what it portrays. So number two for me is The Color Purple, released in 1985, and the book, I believe, was like 1983. Uh, it wasn't too long before the movie came around. I can't, maybe it was 1982. I'm not sure, but it was pretty quick. It was like right around that same time. The Color Purple came out, and it was almost immediately adapted. So right around that time.
Excellent, excellent.
Oh, and it was written by Alice Walker, just in case. I mean, you should
Okay.
definitely know that. Yeah. Do you know who wrote the screenplay for The Color Purple?
I do not.
Um, I can't remember either. But I mean, I know that The Color Purple was directed by Steven Spielberg, but I can't remember who did the adaptation. Because I feel like that is like super important. But I seem to remember that it was somebody that was foreign. So I don't know, but we'll look that up. I'll definitely add that as a note somewhere.
Ready for my number two? Can you handle my number two?
I hope so. Is it Die Hard?
Oh, it could have been.
Is Die Hard actually? Was that based on a book? I don't think it was based on a book.
Yes, it actually is based on a book called The Detective.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, there's one that I have not read. Wow.
And in fact, originally, John McClane, not in the 80s, but earlier on when it was originally bought to be made into a film, was going to star Frank Sinatra.
Oh, wow.
And then, over time, things changed.
Oh, I
And
see it. It's called Nothing Lasts Forever. That's interesting. That is so interesting. Okay, that's definitely a book that I will have to read.
I think you'll find that as far as adaptations go, maybe the movie's not so, not so, you know, great with it.
Authentic. It's
Yeah.
very authentic to the source material, but it would still be interesting, because sometimes I love to see where people get their ideas from. So as a storyteller, this is definitely an interesting one. I have to see that. Okay. All right.
That's the weird thing. Just a quick side note. That's the weird thing about screenwriting and Hollywood and adaptations specifically. There are so many times that something can start out as one thing, and then a producer somewhere goes, you know what? Let's change this and make it this.
I
mean,
mean,
that's
honestly, I feel like our next list should be the worst adaptations of all time, because somewhere along the line, really good intentions got tangled up with something,
mhm.
and the result is just absolutely whack, and it's awful. So, yeah.
Well, we'll put a pin in that. Um, and go to my number two, which
All
is a
right, number two.
1994 flick, which was a tremendous year for movies and releases. 1994, directed by Robert Zemeckis. It is Forrest Gump.
Ooh, good choice.
Now, the thing about this adaptation is, bar none, it is better than the book. It is much better than the book. It is tremendously the people. And first of all, if you haven't seen the story of how Forrest Gump was made, Netflix has a great little docuseries. Um, what is it? The Films That Made Us.
Hmm.
Uh, I would love to see a story just based on the story of how that got made. I'd love to see a movie adaptation of that, because it is, it's a doozy. But uh, if you want to hear about it, that Netflix docuseries is the place to go. Forrest Gump. Why is it better? Well, one, they cut out so much, and I know for a lot of the show we've been talking about how it can be detrimental to the story that they cut out particular parts of the story. Like, did you know in the book, Forrest Gump becomes an astronaut and an actor, and has an almost sidekick uh, for a while. That's a monkey. And that's just some of the few things that they didn't add to the film and they decided to be different. They also made him more likable in the film because even though Forrest Gump in the book is still just a simple guy, um, it's he's a little more curmudgeon-y, just a tiny bit more. So Forrest and Tom Hanks' portrayal of Forrest Gump made him, I think, more lovable under the direction of Robert Zemeckis. It still tells again the the basic story of a man that kind of sees himself, you know, in these outrageous situations that you wouldn't believe all happened to one person. Whereas the book, it's less about the historical aspects of the situations and just more the fact that it's just outlandish situations. But having more of the focus on these important pieces of history, I think really helped narrow down the narrative and improved by trimming sort of unnecessary fat from the story. The thing is, uh, this is one of those situations where you know what, I'm not going to speak from an authoritative position about what Winston Groom, the author, thought of the actual movie, but I know that there were some finance issues that cropped up after the movie came out where he didn't feel he got nearly paid enough. Because if I'm not mistaken, and take this with an entire tub of salt, they listed the movie as a loss to cover um, other losses under the studio, which is something that happens from time to time. And since his deal was, and I'm trying to remember this, since his deal had a lot to do with profitability from the film, he would have lost out on a lot of money if it was marked down. If they used the profits from that to cover the losses from other films, and then technically said, and we kind of lost money with this, but that's neither here nor there. When it comes to this movie, Robert Zemeckis did a wonderful job shooting this. Picked a great cast with Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, and Gary Sinise kind of filling out the main roles proper in the movie, and getting their music coordinator to put together sort of an amazing soundtrack for the for an entire generation um, as Forrest grows up, from the 50s to the 80s. It's really a collection to behold. Forrest Gump is a wonderful film, although I will say, hot take here, it's not even the best version. There's an Indian film that remade it, but since that is not an adaptation of the book, that's an adaptation of the movie. It's a remake of the movie Forrest Gump. I think it's Lal Singh Chadha, if I'm remembering correctly. I think that is the superior version of the movie, just because Lal is, and the way I put it like this, um, Tom Hanks plays Forrest Gump as kind of a wanderer. He's just kind of wandering through life, and finds himself in these situations by happenstance. And that's sort of the same thing, except there is a never-ending optimism with Lal. So even when things are the worst, he has a smile on his face, and he's thinks it's always going to get better, and that's something that um, Forrest Gump doesn't really have, because he's used to growing up with sort of the abuses of his environments. It's not that he's angry like in the book. It's just that it just doesn't really phase him. life doesn't seem to really phase him so much. But as it stands, Forrest Gump is my number two because it is one of those rare situations where the movie improves upon the book.
Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
All right. Good choice. Very good
Thank you.
choice.
Did you read
Okay.
the book?
I have actually. Yes.
Okay, then you know where I'm coming from. Then
I do. I do. And I actually agree. So, yeah. Good job.
yes.
Um, okay, my number one is also my number one most favorite movie of all time. So anyone who knows me knows immediately what this movie is. When I first watched this movie, I did not know that it was based on a book, and I ran, not walked, to go find it in my local library. Could not find it, had to wait for 6 months for it to be delivered to the library because it had to come from out of state. Um, but it is the book that is The Bridge Over the River Kwai. Bridge Over the River Kwai is number one. It is just a perfect movie. Period. End of story. Stop. Um, there is zero faults in that movie. There is nothing superfluous. Um, there is nothing even in that movie that like makes me wish that they would have reshot it. Like, oh, I wish they could just go back and do this again or this again. No. It to me this movie resonates on sort of like, you know how people say that when they get into their crystal experience, like, oh yeah, you feel that harmonic energy. Yeah, okay, well, not to get too new agey about anything, but I swear that's how this movie makes me feel. I get everything that I need to get from a storytelling perspective out of it. It's a beautifully done film. The language is perfect. Um the amount of time that they spend on things is just so fitting. Like there is nothing where the camera lingers too long or where the editing is too choppy, or it's just amazing. But I didn't know that this was based on a book. And when I found out that it was based on a book, like I said, it took me a really long time to find it. And uh, so, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about. There are some differences. The book is. It doesn't have a couple of the characters that are in the film. Like they demanded that there be an American in the film, and so they kind of created a character that acts as that bridge character, and that's the guy who's the one that they in the very beginning who escapes from the camp. um and it's interesting because in the movie that kind of works. Like it's hard to imagine when you read the book that he's not there because like, well, how did they figure some of this other stuff out? But some things really become almost, a deeper, uh almost sadder story without him in the middle, so it's kind of interesting. But one thing that I will say about the 1952 novel, which was written by this man named Pierre Boulez, and it's that he treats all of the subject material with, I don't know if I would say like reverence as much as I would say respect. He absolutely nails the experience of being in one of these prison camps. And it makes you sort of feel as if there is something, um I don't know what the word is, but there's something eerie about that experience that's going on there. The writing is really good in this. It's really excellent. Um, Pierre Boulez also wrote The Planet of the Apes, and so like y- there is something about his imagined storytelling which is really really good. It's both condensed, and you can feel that from the book altogether, but you also get this feeling that it's not just that he knows what he's talking about, it's that he understands humanity. He understands that pushing people to the brink of their actual humanity has a marked effect on how they both react, and then similarly how people react around them. And both in Planet of the Apes, which I can't even remember what year he wrote that, 1960 something, um and in Bridge on the River Kwai, he brings both of those main characters to the point of they don't feel human anymore, and it takes something big to bring them back. And specifically, this is sort of at the crux of it. um there's also, I think, something about the book which kind of comes through, and that is this fascination with building things. I absolutely loved finding out that the writer of Bridge on the River Kwai had an engineering degree, because it made everything from the book and the film feel as if it was realistic from an engineering standpoint. And I mean, there's just like no substitute for that. It's beautiful. I just I really felt like I was a part of something that was the author's shared experience, a life experience in this fictional world, and it was really cool. I absolutely felt like that was just smart, just super smart. He was also apparently, um he was a secret agent in a resistance movement in Burma, and French Indonesia, and he was captured by French loyalists and subjected to crazy forced labor stuff, which is where the idea for Bridge on the River Kwai comes from. um so lots of cool things about the author that then translate into both an amazing book and one of my most favorite, most complete, most epic choices of number one for a film. It makes my number one on almost every single what is your top 5 or top 10 or top 20 movies. Bridge on the River Kwai always comes up in my number one spot. I watch it at least twice a year, and it always reminds me about what it means to be so absorbed in a task, so absorbed in the making of something, the doing of something, that you forget what it is that the purpose of that thing is, that you can be blinded by the very thing that you are creating because you're not creating it with the right intent, because there's energy behind that, and it's important to keep that in mind at all times. And as somebody who's creative, not an engineer, the creative part of pulling something together, the intent behind it is really important. So when somebody says, I don't want to read that, or oh, that seems really, like, why would you write that, or whatever, sometimes my feeling is to be a lot more like the main character of Bridge on the River Kwai, which is our Colonel Nicholson. um and uh how can I even say this? uh he also is misled by the intent, so much so that he's almost blinded to what he's there for in the first place. So anyway, so without going into a long tangent, Bridge on the River Kwai makes me super happy. Great adaptation, fabulous book, absolutely worth the read. I never would have known that it was based on a book until I looked it up, and was really, really happy to have that as a part of my reading experience as well. So, great book, great movie. That's my number one.
And I inadvertently gave you a reason to have it there.
Did you?
Yeah, I didn't even. It's not that I didn't realize it was a book. I was like, it didn't cross. Much like The Outsiders, I was like, not even thinking about it when I came up with the list idea. Um, so it's like getting to your number as we're counting down. Um, I have this thought. Well, at least you're not going to be able to get rid. Oh crap! Not that I was intentionally trying to block you from, putting down your favorite movie, but I just I get the feeling that even when you come up with a list, sometimes you're like, how would he fit Kevin Smith into this, and how can I
Yeah.
stop that?
I mean, listen, we all have our favorite both niche movies and our ideas of what we find to be the most pleasing. And after years and years and years of doing deconstruction on stories, there are certain stories that just make me happy. And it's hard to sort of put the definitive touch on why they make you happy, much like the Kevin Smith um, piece, but you know it makes you happy. And I think that when I read this book, I I I'm not saying that like anybody ever questioned me on it, but I felt personally like in my own psyche vindicated for loving the story as the movie so much because it was based on literature that this book is a little bit hard to read. It's hard to read because it is definitely written in a style that feels older. It has that sort of almost literary stuffiness to it, I think. It's not written with contemporary, easy language. So it becomes a little bit more of a slog to get through. But I mean, it's masterful. It is absolutely brilliant, and that little piece of vindication sort of makes me feel, I think, a lot like the Kevin Smith stories that you love. There is something special about it that just resonates, and I totally get it. I do. Even if I make fun of you or give you teasing, I still respect it.
Wait, you make fun of me?
What? No. Who said that? I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
Also, let's not forget that William Holden, Alec Guinness, and Jack Hawkins in this movie are truly t- just amazing. I mean, Alec Guinness is just, man, he is a bomb. He is an
Genuine
absolute
class.
God. He's so good. Everything I see him in just makes me go, "D- d- I wish I had a pinky full of the talent that he has or had. Because, whew, man, it just jumps off the screen. So I'm excited now. What's your number one? Because I mean, we have really built up quite a list here.
Nah, it's not that good. You know what? I'm not even going to do it. It's not that good.
You liar. Get over there. What is your number one?
Fine. My number one of literary adaptations. We go back to my boy, Stephen King.
All right.
Although he didn't write it, and no, it's not Maximum Overdrive. He didn't direct it either, but he did write the source material, which, when it was released, didn't get released as a book. And no, it wasn't a short story. No, Stephen King hearkened even further back to a period in time where stories came out in sort of a serialized nature, where
Mm.
bits and pieces were released at a time, and that's what he did with this story. Released them all. I believe it was seven books, seven little books, which later got collected and made it into one tome. But I'm talking about from director Frank Darabont's 1999's The Green Mile.
Oh, that's an interesting adaptation.
There, uh, admittedly, there are some things that sort of leave me scratching my head. You'll have to forgive me if I don't remember every detail, but in the books, the the story is told from the standpoint of Paul Edgecombe from two different places in time. Um, well, it shows him as an old man in a retirement home, and he's telling the story about his time being the head guard on the Green Mile, the place where death row inmates stayed until their execution, death row, if you will. So he's telling the story, but it also follows him through some of his daily activities as an old man, as he's getting abused by the staff. Well, not the staff, but a very particular staffer in this assisted living facility. And all of that was cut from the film. And then you briefly see him as an old man as he begins to tell a story, and then it follows up afterwards with him surprising his friend, his lady friend, with you know the realization of how old he actually is. And like I said, that the abuse from the caregiver, if you will, uh, not in the film at all. It strictly sticks with the story of the Green Mile and John Coffey. And to me, like I said, it was confusing, but it didn't take away from that main story, because it seemed like the real crux of telling his story from the two different places in time was kind of to show the similarities between the people he worked with, especially Percy, and the guy that was treated him like crap as an old man.
Right.
But to really sum it all up, Frank Darabont understands Stephen King like nobody else, it seems, between Green Mile and Shawshank. And the article I read years ago that he's the one that picked up the rights to The Long Walk, although nothing had ever come of it, and so far nothing has come of it. That's my favorite Stephen King story, period. Um, he does a wonderful job. He's an excellent director, and I think you got to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to Tom Hanks. And this is yet another topic that we've covered where Tom Hanks just kind of he does his job so darn well that um, you have to acknowledge his talent, and you have to acknowledge his ability to bring uh, the the characters from the page uh, to the screen, bring them to life in tremendous performances. This is the movie that made me start recognizing Sam Rockwell, and Michael Clark Duncan is. I mean, well, he was. Let's face it, not the kind of guy that would get very deep, dramatic roles, but John Coffey, he made you feel, he made you connect with him, and it's just very unfortunate that he didn't have an opportunity to get many more roles like this. And The Green Mile is a movie that is practically perfect on its own. Um, Given the fact that, yeah, there were some omissions from the book, I, I can only say practically, but it stands the test of time for 24 years so far. Period pieces seem to be the ones that kind of stick out more. They hold up more as time goes on. Maybe it's because they're not contemporary in the sense that the story on screen is very relatable to the time that it was released in, but you're going even further back for a different period in time, and that's not going to change because it's already set. The point being, Green Mile's my number one, and
Nice.
I can't see it in any other way.
Nice. That's a really good choice. I actually think that the adaptation did the story a solid. It added a lot to the story because the story needed to be fleshed out. It was a good idea, but it needed a little fleshing out. Okay, I unfortunately am going to have to hop off of the podcast here, but I did want to do two things. One, I want to recap my movies, and two, I want to give you your homework. So I'm going to give you your homework first, and then I'll recap my movies. Our homework for next week is to find 10 movies that
Mhm.
are our favorite
Mhm.
cop dramas.
Cop dramas.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, the cops can be however you want them to be. Lead detective, quirky comedy cops like the Keystone cops that get into trouble, police academy, whatever. Or they can be very serious. And I'm looking at you, Training Day, with like, the cops that actually are sort of on the line, not sure if they're morally correct or incorrect, and yeah, that kind of stuff. So that's our list for
So is
next
it
week.
cop movies?
Well, it's hmm, I don't know if it's like cop movies as much as it's just movies about that have our favorite police in them.
Okay.
So, and
Okay.
and again, it can be a police detective, it can be the police, like in general, or
Like
it could be
Sting.
somebody who's, like an ex policeman who's sort of finding his own way. Because I feel like there's a lot of to explore out there about our understanding of how we view this genre. I'll explain next week where this came from, but I had a really interesting conversation about how we look at police and authority in our movies, and I thought it'd be really interesting to create a list around that so that we can talk about where some of these ideas come from.
Okay.
So that's the homework for next week, and I'm going to wrap up my list, and then I'm going to let you say the goodbyes because I really do have to hop off. I'm so sorry. um my number 10 is Book of Blood by Clive Barker. Number 9, Dangerous Liaisons, the 1988 version. Number 8, Silence of the Lambs. Number 7, The Outsiders. Number 6, Sounder. Number 5, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Number 4, Rosemary's Baby. Number 3, To Kill a Mockingbird. Number 2, The Color Purple. And number 1, The Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Okay. So you gonna head out?
I have to hop off. I'm so sorry. I have dinner reservations, and unfortunately, podcasts and dinner reservations are just beating up against each other. But Josh, thank you so much for this list. It's been really great,
Hmm.
and I absolutely loved it. So I will also say good night, Jen, before we actually say good night, Jen, just so that it's in there. So, all right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Right. As for the rest of us, my list goes as follows. Number 10, Romeo and Juliet from Baz Luhrmann. And because you got to be specific. Number 9, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. Number 8, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Number 7, Gerald's Game. Number 6, Ready Player One. Number 5, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Number 4, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Number 3, Jurassic Park is frightening in the dark. Number 2, Forrest Gump sat alone on a. Anyway, yeah, Weird Al just dominates my list. Except for this one. The Green Mile is my number 1. That is my top 10 literary adaptations. And you know what? the show doesn't end there, ladies and gentlemen, because we actually have some feedback from the peoples, you, the peoples, with their selections for some of their favorite literary adaptations. Emily says 2011's Jane Eyre. Okay. Taylor says he's got 3 here. The Count of Monte Cristo, Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and The Prince of Egypt. Interesting, Taylor. Jamie chimes in with Jurassic Park, Last of the Mohicans, Shutter Island, and American Psycho. You know, I'm right there with you with that Jurassic Park, buddy. And finally, we have Charlie, an amazing human being, that says the 1984 version of 1984. Excellent. So that has been the 10-2-1 podcast for the week. I'm usually, here to say good night, and she already did that. So what I will say to close the show is remember to keep your pen and paper ready, because you never know when you're going to have to make a list. I've been Josh. Jen, she had to leave a moment ago. We both thank you for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. If you want to check out more from Jen, you can go to moviesandmeals.com, where you can see recipes, wonderful recipes based on films and television shows. It's a great resource if you're looking to especially entertain with thematic foods for your entertainment. And if you want to know more about me, just head on over to wadcomedia.com, and you'll be able to see, all of the links to the socials and whatnot. And don't forget to tune in to the Winecast each and every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. What are we going to talk about this week? I don't know. It's not 5 minutes before air, and I'm not psychic. So until next week, I bid you all adieu, or do not. There is no try. Good night, everybody.